Hey teachers, welcome to a journal and chat session. I'm Haley at Teacher's Pet, and I am working on my second ever weekly bullet journal spread. This one is going to be for April 6th through the 12th. And I say this is my second ever real spread because I always had used printed planners, and predated planners for keeping track of all of my things. And finally decided to make the jump to creating my own as I have a better understanding of what I need to keep track of as a full-time, assistant teaching professor at an R2 university. So I do have a 4-4 load, so a full kind of deck of classes, and then, service, mentorship, research, personal projects, and of course working on our teacher's pet app. So I just found I had a lot of things that I kind of want to track and try making my own spread. So anyway, in this week's sort of decorate and chat with me, I am going to talk about my teaching observations that I had this week. And so at my university, we historically haven't had a super strong practice of doing teaching observations. My department, kind of went through leadership changes, and it was obviously very messy time the last kind of 2 years. And so I actually haven't had anybody really sit in on my class in quite a while since I was a grad student, essentially. So I was really excited when my new department chair kind of announced with me, prodding a bit ever since he kind of joined. I was like, this would be a really cool thing. This would be really helpful to do. So anyway, he finally announced this spring he's going to sit in on one section of everybody's class to do a teaching observation. And so he allowed us to actually pick which days that we want, which, was cool. It was helpful, though I think in future semesters, I'm actually going to request that he just surprise kind of pop quizzes in, for me to get a little bit better, you know, um, true proper review and assessment of my teaching. But anyway, he let us pick this time, and so I had him come into a section that I had prepared brand new activities. I'd actually never ran that particular kind of day and lecture before, so I was pretty excited to kind of work on that and see that. um, and so he came in, and the class that he did the observation for, it is a general ed writing course. So it's, supposed to be for sophomores, but I get a lot of first year students in there as well. And we focus on, intro to technical writing. This particular class is also only 1 day a week, because it is a hybrid class. And so I just meet one time for 75 minutes, and I do that multiple times in the week for all the different sections of that same course. So the week that he came in, we were doing kind of introduction to research and data. In the past, I had used those classes, those segments, as two completely distinct units in my week. I did one whole one on kind of intro to research, on like information literacy, and then I did a whole separate week on intro to like data viz kind of stuff. But this semester I wanted to collapse those so that way I had more room for things like a digital accessibility unit, some other kind of stuff. So with that, like, my students had read, watched a mini lecture video about my research process, and then read some chapters, on research strategies for social sciences, as well as intro to data storytelling. Now, when he came into my classroom, just how we kind of set it up, like in terms of preparation, I was pretty chill about it. I definitely am kind of one of those people where it's like, I want it to be an accurate assessment. So I really didn't go, too over the top at all with preparing or making sure it's like extra good or anything like that. I just did the same level of prep that I always do for it. um Came in. I didn't like introduce him or anything for my class, which maybe I should have. I don't know, he just kind of sat in the corner, and I basically just pretended that he wasn't there, and all my students kind of just pretended he wasn't there. Maybe I should have mentioned something. I wonder if that was weird for them. I'm not really sure. But I just essentially acted like he was a ghost. on the wall and didn't say anything about it. Um, and yeah, then I just kind of went from there. Of course, I tried to put my best foot forward because how can you not when your boss is watching you? But it went extremely well, extremely smoothly, actually. So we had started out, we were starting a new unit. So I had the calendar up, as kind of the first slide deck, and just went through here's everything in our unit. So that way he also could get kind of a sense of how I'm finishing the semester. And then I always do something called connections from class to IRL, in real life, where I give them an example from, to humanize me, and I just talk about how I'm using the class concepts actually in my life. And I find it pretty easy to find those connections and concepts, and students definitely in their weekly reflections often mention how helpful they find it that I am basically showing them exactly how I'm applying what we're working on, the skills and knowledge to other areas in my life. So I did that. And then we go into the activities. And so my first activity, I gave them kind of a mock research question. Again, kind of related, they know that I have ducks. So I often, bring just examples of my life into the activities. So the first thing, they had to work in groups and come up with different research strategies to basically acquire knowledge about ducks. Some primary research strategies, secondary research strategies. They chatted for a few minutes, and then we did, a big group share out, wrote down their answers on the board, kind of standard fare, and then walked them through how I actually conducted research to make sure our ducks have good nutrition. So, going through primary source examples, things like, oh, we went and observed some friends and family that have chickens and have ducks, and talking to them and getting, generating new data through observation, which then led to us making connections closer to the field and their careers of how that type of observation shows up in the workplace with, focus groups and user testing and whatnot. And then also talking about how I, went and talked to my veterinarian about duck care, and then connected that to how in a workplace, right? It could be things like expert interviews, to get them to kind of think and make those professional jumps. And then we did the same thing with different secondary sources, and that led to a really nice, kind of segue and discussion on information literacy and how we can be skeptical, like healthily skeptical about information, especially for watching things like videos, TikToks and whatnot. And I was able to share how, yes, I did use a lot of homestead duck care TikToks, which are like valid, credible, helpful sources of information on this topic. But, and with their partners, they kind of talked about, okay, well, what are some of the potential drawbacks, and how, I don't actually know what happened to their ducks after they showed off, this feeder, or what's happening outside of the frame. And it was just, I just felt like it was a really positive conversation with all my students about that, which is pretty fun. And I do think that they pointed out some good kind of healthy perspectives on how to get source variety. So anyway, from there, then we did some activities on synthesizing instead of summarizing different sources. And I gave them a tip, which in their reflections, a lot of them were like, never heard that tip. That was actually really helpful. As they're drafting their writing, I told them to color code and highlight the sources that they're using so they could look back at a paragraph and see if they are connecting, right, multiple different sources or just rephrasing and summarizing one. And so I'm excited, and I hope they actually do try it on their projects as they indicated they would in their weekly reflection to me. So then we moved from those activities right into activity 2, which was about data storytelling. I played a video for them from the Harvard Business Review. It was like a 4 or 5 minute video of a data storytelling example. And I bring little whiteboards for them to work on, whiteboards, markers, personal sized ones. And so often I have them do activities where they're just writing it down there. So that way I find most of my students don't bring like pen and paper to class anymore. And instead of getting like their computers out and having that distraction, I just actually prefer to give them a whiteboard, have them, jot down these thoughts. They aren't really notes, they're just thoughts from the activity. So we got their whiteboards, and they, while we watched the video, wrote down, concepts that they recognized from class, and, reactions and thoughts. And then we asked about it. Now, one thing I really love doing that I think works well. So on my big whiteboard for the board, I put it up so that way I can write. There's a whiteboard behind the projector screen. So I like paused, the video on some of the data graphics and then had them point things out and wrote actually on the whiteboard as it's being, projected. So it was really helpful and kind of a fun activity. And then we just wrapped up with me giving a demo of some of the tech and tools and how to use like the library to find sources for their projects. And that's how I wrapped up the day and the lesson. It's kind of went the wet. And so then, later then I debriefed with my department chair and some of the things that he pointed out in the observation. Overall, it went really positively. I knew it went well. He reflected that it went well, so it was, a pretty chill conversation. But a few of the things he noted that I didn't have any wasted time in my class, which I agree. When I only meet with them once a week for 75 minutes, I do keep it moving. But he was like, as I'm watching your students, they did seem like very engaged the whole time, probably because you do move, I do move quick, right? We have activities every few minutes. We're like kind of switching it up and asking them to talk about something new with their partner, or, we're fully into a new activity. And so, yeah, he definitely noted that the students kept pace and definitely stayed more engaged as all of that was switching up, which was really cool. He hadn't seen that many kind of multimodal elements in a class before, and he said, it seems like it'd be hard for people to pull that off. And I was like, honestly, it isn't. I just, have really taken my time to figure out the right technology to fit my needs and have practice with it. And so I think maybe there'll be opportunities for me to do workshops for my department on what I'm using, which I'm pretty excited about. And the main thing that he did say I should work on is creating a clearer overarching theme to connect my activities. So moving forward, like next semester, I'm going to call the unit information literacy instead of research and data. So that way there's a clearer connection between finding sources, synthesizing sources, and then data stories and understanding how to use kind of graphics and data, which I thought was really helpful. Like that made a lot of sense, and I'm excited to implement. So that was my teaching observation story. It was pretty interesting, fun. If you've had teaching observations, this semester, or any kind of stories or tips, what you do and how you did it in your class, please comment, below. I'd love to hear them and start to form kind of a community around that. But that's kind of how my teaching observation went. And I'm almost done decorating my journal. And so what you've been kind of watching as I was just chatting, I wanted to create a lot more space in it. And everything felt too compact from last week's layout. So yeah, I kind of corrected that with adding more of those little columns, kind of blank space, white space. I also, extended the lines and shading for where I'm going to write in my notes because I didn't give myself enough space last time. Made sure I had an actual full to-do list and important section. But otherwise, it's a very similar layout. Now I'm just wrapping up with a few of these like coffee stained stickers that I was like, I don't know where else to use that. So I'll also use them here, patting everything down, and that's it. Thanks for joining me. See you, teachers. I hope you have a great class.